North Atlantic, April 1943. A pale horizon bleeds into gray. The sea heaves, cold and endless. Through a U-boat periscope, Captain Helmut Mansek of U-515 locks onto a shape. Another merchant ship. Black silhouette against a bruise-colored sky. He blinks. It shouldn't be there. Just 3 days earlier, his Wolfpack had sunk 2 freighters on this same convoy route. Radio reports confirmed it. Both gone. Yet now, another Liberty ship cuts through the mist, stacked high with cargo, smoke curling from its funnel like defiance. In the metallic hush of the submarine, a crewman whispers, "Schon wieder eine." Another one. Mansek adjusts focus. The hull bears fresh paint. The letters still sharp. SS Samuel Chase. He watches her wake slice the Atlantic. Deliberate. Unbroken. Around her, destroyers prowl like wolves reversed. For months, the Atlantic had been Germany's hunting ground. The U-boats ruled by night. Between 1939 and 1942, they sent over 13 million tons of Allied shipping to the ocean floor. Tankers, troop ships, freighters. It seemed unstoppable, but now the prey had multiplied faster than the predators could kill. Each Liberty ship was supposed to take 8 months to build. Now, America was launching one every 4 days. In Richmond, California, a single shipyard broke all logic. The SS Robert E. Peary, built in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Word reached the U-boat fleet, spreading disbelief through the Atlantic Command. They are building them faster than we can sink them. In that cold dawn, Captain Mansek doesn't yet know it, but the tide has turned. What began as a campaign of terror beneath the waves will soon become a war of exhaustion above the assembly lines. The periscope lowers. Diesel engines hum. In the dim red light, charts rustle. Outside, Liberty ships steam toward Europe. Hundreds of them, endless, defiant. The war at sea is no longer decided by torpedoes. It is decided by speed, steel, and the unyielding rhythm of American industry. The Battle of the Atlantic began before the world even called it that. September 1939, Britain declared war on Germany. Within hours, U-30 torpedoed the passenger liner Athenia. It was the opening note of a 6-year struggle that would decide whether Britain lived or starved. The Atlantic was Britain's lifeline. Every bullet, loaf of bread, and gallon of fuel had to cross that ocean. Without it, the island would collapse. Hitler knew it. In Berlin's naval offices, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat arm, outlined his vision. A fleet of submarines hunting in wolf packs, striking convoys under cover of night, vanishing beneath the waves before escorts could respond. By 1941, the numbers were brutal. In a single month, June 1941, U-boats sank over 325,000 tons of Allied shipping. Convoys burned under the aurora borealis. Survivors floated in oil-slicked seas, clutching lifeboats as the horizon glowed red. The Allies called it the Black Pit, a mid-Atlantic gap beyond aircraft range where no radar could reach. There, the U-boats thrived. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill later admitted, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. For Britain, every convoy that vanished beneath the waves brought her closer to starvation. For Germany, each success was proof that the ocean itself could be weaponized." Then came December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. When America entered the war, the Atlantic already bled daily. The U-boats moved west, patrolling the U.S. coastline. In early 1942, they called it the Second Happy Time. Tankers burned off Cape Hatteras. New York's skyline flickered with fires from ships struck offshore. But the shock that followed was not military. It was industrial. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had promised to make the United States the arsenal of democracy. Now, that phrase would become literal. Across the nation, blueprints turned into battle plans. Car factories shifted overnight to produce tanks. Aircraft plants sprouted beside cornfields. And along the coasts, a new kind of shipyard rose, powered by speed, efficiency, and a man few had heard of: Henry J. Kaiser. Kaiser was not a traditional shipbuilder. He was an industrial visionary, the mind behind the Hoover Dam's logistics miracle. His philosophy was simple: break construction into modular parts, standardize every piece, and let workers assemble ships like automobiles. In 1941, the first of his Liberty ships slid into the water. They were not elegant. Their hulls were angular, their welds crude, their decks utilitarian. But they worked, sturdy, spacious, and simple to mass produce. Each could carry 9,000 tons of cargo: tanks, aircraft, grain, or troops. Each could be built by thousands of ordinary Americans: welders, electricians, riveters, many of them women and minorities entering heavy industry for the first time. By 1943, Kaiser's shipyards at Richmond, California, and Portland, Oregon, had transformed industrial time itself. In 1941, a Liberty ship took 230 days to build. By mid-1943, that number fell below 30 days. The Atlantic War had become a race: torpedoes versus tools. In Berlin, Dönitz studied intercepted intelligence reports. Each one told a new truth. For every ship sunk, 2 more replaced it. German intelligence calculated that America had launched over 2,700 Liberty ships by war's end, more than the entire pre-war merchant fleet of the United Kingdom. The German naval staff could scarcely believe the production rates. In a confidential memo dated August 1943, an analyst wrote, "It appears the enemy's replacement of losses is nearly instantaneous." The U-boat crews at sea felt it firsthand. Convoys grew thicker, escorts deadlier. Radar pings echoed through the darkness. Air patrols appeared where once there was only horizon. Each launch ceremony on the American coast sent a silent message across the Atlantic: "You cannot sink what we can build faster than you can kill." Behind those statistics were faces: ordinary citizens turned builders of war. In Richmond, shipyard sirens blared 24 hours a day. Sparks showered from steel plates. Teenagers learned to weld beside veterans of the Great Depression. Women like Rosie the Riveter became national symbols, but their reality was harder: burns, fatigue, and pride. A welder named Ella Mae Wiggins once said, "We don't fight with guns, we fight with our hands, so they can fight out there." Each hull that slid into the bay carried the weight of both continents. In every rivet, the echo of a strategy that Germany never understood until it was too late: that America's greatest weapon was not its navy, but its capacity to build one from nothing. From Berlin's command rooms to the depths of the Atlantic, that realization was spreading. The U-boat commanders who once stalked convoys like predators were now becoming the hunted. And yet, on paper, Germany still believed it could starve the Atlantic lifeline. If only the wolf packs struck fast enough. The question was simple: could skill, stealth, and technology outpace an enemy whose factories never slept? In 1942, the German Navy believed it had found the formula for victory. The Atlantic was vast. The Allies were stretched thin. The U-boats, sleek and disciplined, were the silent blade of the Reich. Admiral Karl Dönitz called it Rudel Taktik, the Wolfpack tactic. Instead of lone hunters, submarines would operate in coordinated packs, guided by encrypted radio through the Enigma system. When a convoy was sighted, one U-boat shadowed it, signaling others to converge under cover of darkness. At night, they surfaced among the ships, diesel engines roaring, firing torpedoes at silhouettes before vanishing beneath the waves. It was methodical, ruthless, effective. The numbers told the story. Between January and August 1942, German U-boats sank over 3 million tons of Allied shipping. For every merchantman sunk, another cargo of food, weapons, or oil failed to reach Britain. Dönitz calculated that maintaining 100 operational U-boats in the Atlantic could cut Britain's lifeline beyond repair. It was a war of attrition, tonnage versus tonnage, and he believed he could win. In Berlin, the High Command approved massive expansion. Factories at Kiel, Bremen, and Hamburg worked around the clock to produce the new Type 7 and Type 9 submarines, sleek, compact, deadly. Each submarine carried 14 torpedoes and a crew of 45 men who operated like ghosts beneath the waves. Their motto was whispered pride, "Unsere Waffe ist die Unsichtbarkeit." Our weapon is invisibility. In those early years, they were right. The Atlantic convoys burned. Radio London read lists of missing ships each morning. The Germans called it the happy time. But war is never as clean as its doctrine. By late 1942, the flawless design began to falter. Every plan that depended on secrecy faced the same invisible enemy: intelligence. The British, through Bletchley Park, had begun breaking Enigma signals under Alan Turing's cryptanalytic teams. Convoys started changing routes unexpectedly. Wolf packs sailed to empty seas. Dönitz's captains began to suspect leaks, but could not find them. Then came technology. Radar, sonar, and HF-DF, Huff-Duff. Radio direction finders gave the Allies eyes and ears in the darkness. Aircraft equipped with Lee lights hunted U-boats that once surfaced safely at night. The hunters were becoming the hunted. Meanwhile, across the ocean, America's shipyards were rewriting time. The German plan assumed that each Liberty ship required at least 6 months to complete. But by mid-1943, assembly line shipbuilding had reduced that to less than 3 weeks. At Kaiser's Richmond Yard No. 2, prefabricated hull sections rolled from workshops like parts of an enormous mechano set. Men and women worked 3 shifts, day and night. Steel sheets arrived by train in the morning. By evening, they were welded into form. A ship like the SS Robert E. Peary could go from keel laying to launch in under 5 days. When news of this reached Dönitz, he reportedly paused and said quietly, "Then the war is lost," because he understood the mathematics of war. Even if each U-boat sank 2 ships a week, which few ever did, the Americans would still outbuild him 2-to-1. At sea, the change was palpable. Convoys once scattered now traveled with discipline, each merchant ship escorted by corvettes, destroyers, and air cover. Depth charges thundered through the ocean like heartbeat drums. For U-boat crews, missions that had once felt like triumphs now felt like slow drowning. Fuel shortages forced longer patrols. Repairs lagged. Replacement crews were barely trained. The Atlantic had turned hostile, not because the enemy was faster, but because he was endless. Every ship sunk was replaced, painted, and launched again before the U-boat even reached port. Inside the BDU, U-Boat High Command, in Paris, radio intercepts told the story. Convoys were no longer collapsing. Instead, the number of Allied ships at sea was increasing each month. From 1942 to 1943, the tide reversed. 42. U-boats sank 1,106 quays. 4 Allied ships. 1943. U-boat losses tripled, while Allied production overwhelmed the seas. By spring, Allied shipyards were launching over 140 merchant vessels per month. The wolf packs had reached the limits of human endurance. The assembly line had not. By April 1943, U-boat morale collapsed. Reports described commanders hunting in empty seas. Convoy escorts now had ASDIC sonar, hedgehog mortars, and depth-charge projectors that blanketed entire zones. The Atlantic, once their domain, became a graveyard. Still, Hitler demanded results. Factories kept churning out submarines, but training lagged. Veteran crews perished faster than they could be replaced. Of 40,000 men who served in the U-boat arm, over 28,000 would die. In the end, the greatest flaw in the German plan was not tactical. It was industrial blindness. The Reich had waged war as if technology and courage could outweigh mass and momentum. But across the ocean, a nation had fused its factories to its fleets. The wolf packs had been designed for a war of stealth. They found themselves in a war of production. And that was a battle they could never win. The next chapter of the Atlantic War would be written not in planning rooms, but in chaos, in the convoys themselves, where courage, weather, and luck collided on open water. The turning point was near. A convoy code-named ONS-5 was about to prove that the balance of power at sea had changed forever. North Atlantic, May 1943. The ocean rolls under iron clouds, wind howling at 40 knots. The temperature hovers near freezing. Visibility? None. Convoy ONS-5 steams westward from Liverpool to Halifax. 43 merchant ships, loaded with steel, food, and fuel. Their speed, a fragile 7 knots. Their protection, a handful of British and Canadian escort ships under Commander Peter Gretton. Waiting for them in the mist are over 40 German U-boats, organized into wolf packs Specht and Finke. It will be the largest convoy battle of the war. For Dönitz, this is the test. His message to his captains is clear. Strike them until their spirit breaks. For the Allies, it is survival itself. On April 29th, U-650 sights the convoy and signals headquarters. The order goes out, converge. By May 4th, sonar pings bounce through the storm. Torpedoes flash beneath the waves. The escorts drop depth charges in retaliation. Underwater thunder shaking the hulls of nearby ships. The convoy scatters amid the gale. Visibility drops to 0. Ships veer blindly to avoid collisions. Men cling to icy decks as the sea rears up like a mountain. In one chaotic hour, 4 merchant ships go down. Then 5, then another 2. The night glows faintly orange as burning oil slicks drift in the rain. Gretton's escorts fight blind, guided only by radar and instinct. Destroyers turn at impossible angles, depth charges cascading from their sterns. Every explosion feels personal. A reply to each ship lost. Inside U-264, a young German radio man listens to the chaos above. The submarine dives deeper, the hull creaking under pressure. The captain mutters, "We cannot stay long. The sea itself fights us." And in a way, it does. The storm becomes the convoy's shield. Aircraft cannot fly. Periscopes are useless. The ocean has swallowed both hunter and hunted. By May 5th, the storm begins to ease, and with it, clarity. For the first time, radar and sonar combine into a coordinated defense. The escorts form tight rings around the surviving freighters, sweeping in constant rotation. At dawn, U-638 breaks the surface to fire and is immediately detected. Depth charges explode with terrifying precision. The submarine never resurfaces. Hours later, U-125 is caught on radar by the destroyer Oribe and rammed amidships. The crew abandons ship into the freezing Atlantic. None survive. The Wolfpack tactic, once invisible, now bleeds into visibility. For the first time, Allied coordination, technology plus training, matches and overwhelms German aggression. By May 6th, 7 U-boats are destroyed. Another 5 crippled. Convoy ONS-5, though battered, reaches Halifax with 32 of its 43 ships intact. The cost is heavy. 13 merchantmen lost. But for the German Navy, the cost is devastating. 6 U-boats sunk. Hundreds of trained submariners gone in one engagement. When the battle reports reach Donitz's headquarters, the silence in the room says everything. For the first time, losses have outpaced results. He writes in his war diary, "We have reached the decisive turning point in the U-boat war." In the following weeks, the pattern repeats. Radar-guided convoys. Long-range Liberator aircraft closing the mid-Atlantic gap. Escort carriers launching patrols where U-boats once surfaced freely. The Atlantic, once an open graveyard, becomes a fortress. The numbers tell the story. May 1943, 41 U-boats lost. June 1943, 17 more. By August, Germany recalls nearly all submarines from the North Atlantic. The hunters have become the haunted. For the men who fought that war beneath the waves, it is no longer a campaign. It is survival. Depth charge patterns echo through the dark like heartbeat rhythms. Crewmen sleep beside torpedoes, knowing each patrol might be their last. By war's end, the U-boat service suffers a 70% fatality rate, the highest of any branch in any major force of the war. While German losses rise, American production surges. In 1943 alone, U.S. shipyards launch over 1,000 Liberty ships. Every week, hulls slide into the water to the sound of factory whistles and jazz bands. Workers scrawl names in chalk on the steel, tributes to sons, brothers, and fathers at sea. Each ship is a statement of defiance, an unspoken declaration. You cannot sink America faster than it can rise. Henry Kaiser's yards become symbols of speed. Workers compete in informal wagers. Can we beat the last ship's record? The record stands 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. A ship built faster than most men can cross the Atlantic. Even the German High Command concedes that the war of numbers is lost. One intelligence officer writes bitterly in his 1944 report, "The enemy's shipyards are a second front. One we cannot bomb, cannot blockade, cannot defeat." By the end of 1943, the Atlantic grows quieter. Convoys move with near impunity. The vast submarine pens along the French coast stand half empty. The U-boat captains who return from patrols bring stories of sonar shadows, endless escorts, and aircraft that appeared from nowhere. A few still hope that the new Type 20 electro boat, faster, stealthier, deadlier, might reverse the tide, but it comes too late. By the time it's ready for deployment, the Reich is collapsing. The Atlantic, once Germany's weapon, has become its mirror. Vast, relentless, impossible to control. The Battle of the Atlantic had turned. From this point on, the ocean belonged to the Allies. Not because they sank more ships, but because they refused to stop building them. Next, the story shifts from victory to its price. The outcome and cost of this industrial war at sea. The ships, the lives, and the legacy forged in steel and salt water. By mid-1944, the Atlantic is no longer a battlefield, it's a highway. Convoys stretch from horizon to horizon, ships sailing in disciplined columns under gray skies. The tonnage flow that once dwindled now surges. In 1942, the Allies lost 7.8 million tons of shipping. By 1943, that figure dropped by half, even as American yards launched more new ships than had ever existed in history. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States built 710 Liberty ships, 31 Victory ships, thousands of destroyer escorts, tankers, and troop carriers, each one an assembly line miracle, welded steel, not riveted, modular, not bespoke. The cost of building one Liberty ship averaged $2 million, yet it carried enough cargo to sustain entire divisions across oceans. For every U-boat sunk, dozens of new ships took its place. Germany, once strangling Britain's lifeline, now found itself suffocating under the weight of Allied logistics. In 1943, Dönitz confided to his staff, "The enemy's shipbuilding surpasses our sinking rate by far. We fight like men with knives against a factory." By the summer of 1944, the War of the Atlantic was functionally over. Britain had survived. The Allied armies prepared for Operation Overlord, D-Day, supplied entirely by the industrial arteries that crossed that once fatal ocean. Yet behind every number was a face. For the merchant navy, the victory came at an unbearable cost. More than 30,000 Allied merchant sailors were killed, their ships torpedoed, burned, or broken apart by explosions that came without warning. In total, over 3,500 merchant ships were lost to German submarines. Survival rates in a torpedoed ship were cruelly low. In freezing Atlantic waters, life expectancy was measured in minutes, not hours. Even those rescued often returned to sea days later, because the convoys could not stop. On the other side, the tragedy was deeper still. Of roughly 40,900 German submariners, 28,000 never returned. That is a death rate of nearly 70%, the highest of any major service in modern warfare. Young men, many barely 20, spent weeks underwater, trapped in tin coffins. They lived in darkness and oil fumes, breathing recycled air, haunted by the constant hammer of sonar pings above. A captured U-boat crewman later said, "We did not fear death. We feared being forgotten beneath the sea." The Battle of the Atlantic, often overshadowed by the great land campaigns, was the longest continuous struggle of World War II, spanning 2,075 days. It killed more sailors than all the battleships and carriers of both sides combined. Back home, America's industrial miracle came with its own toll. Shipyards ran nonstop, 7 days a week. Accidents were common. Welding burns, steel splinters, crushed limbs. Casualties of a war fought with cranes and rivet guns. At Richmond, thousands of workers labored through fatigue and exhaustion. Women like Agnes Moore, a welder in Yard Number 3, recalled, "We built ships faster than we slept. When a hull launched, we cheered, then turned back to the next one." That endurance forged more than ships. It forged identity. For every sailor who crossed the Atlantic, there were hundreds of unseen hands who made that voyage possible. Each rivet, each weld, a small defiance against tyranny. When the war finally ended in 1945, the Atlantic convoys stopped sailing. The sea grew quiet again. Liberty ships, once symbols of urgency, now lined harbors in rows, silent giants awaiting new orders or scrap. But for those who had lived that war, the silence was uneasy. The survivors, both Allied and German, carried invisible burdens. For sailors, every calm sea was haunted by ghosts of men who never came home. A British captain wrote in his diary after the last convoy docked, "We did not win the Atlantic. We endured it." The victory had been one of endurance, of willpower measured not in heroism, but in repetition. The unending rhythm of work, production, and convoy after convoy, until one side simply could not go on. The cost of the Battle of the Atlantic was staggering. Allied ships sunk. Over 3,500 merchant seamen lost. 30,000 Plauze U-boats destroyed. 783 German submariners dead. 28,000 aircraft and escorts lost. Thousands more, but those numbers, grim as they were, concealed the greater truth, that this was the battle that made all others possible. Without the convoys, there could be no Africa, no Italy, no Normandy. Every soldier who stormed a beach in 1944 owed his life to the steel corridors forged by the Liberty Fleet. The Industrial War had proven something new, that factories could fight as fiercely as armies, and that the measure of a nation's power was no longer how many it could kill, but how much it could build. The Atlantic was secure. But history does not stop at victory. It asks, what comes after? The lessons of the U-boat war would ripple into strategy, technology, and morality, shaping how nations fought, built, and justified war itself. By 1944, the Atlantic War had ended not with a final battle, but with exhaustion, a war machine ground to silence by its own mathematics. Germany had lost command of the sea. The Allies had turned logistics into strategy. The victory reshaped global warfare. For the first time in modern history, industrial capacity, not territory or tactics, had decided the outcome of a campaign. Factories, once seen as the support arm of the battlefield, had become the front line itself. This realization changed doctrine forever. Naval power was no longer about dreadnoughts or admirals, but about supply chains and standardization. Mass production became the new form of mobilization. In American war colleges after 1945, the Battle of the Atlantic was studied not merely as a fight for sea lanes, but as a model for future conflicts, a test of industrial endurance under total war conditions. Henry Kaiser's modular shipbuilding methods became the template for post-war construction, aerospace manufacturing, and even the space program. The concept of continuous flow production, once radical, became standard across industries. For Germany, the loss of the Atlantic was more than military. It was existential. Without the ability to cut Britain's supply lines, Hitler's hope of forcing the British Empire to negotiate peace evaporated. Every ton of cargo that crossed the Atlantic now fed the Allied advance in Europe. Fuel for bombers, steel for tanks, food for armies. The Reich could not keep up. Its shipyards, bombed and blockaded, produced fewer and fewer submarines. Its fuel reserves dwindled. By late 1944, many U-boats could not even leave Port Dönitz, who would later become Hitler's successor for a brief, tragic week, reflected after the war. We were defeated by the industrial superiority of our enemies, a superiority we neither understood nor could match. The Battle of the Atlantic had revealed the fatal flaw in Germany's grand strategy, a nation of brilliance and innovation undone by its refusal to plan for scale. After 1945, as the world confronted the moral aftermath of the war, the question arose, how should unrestricted submarine warfare be judged? During World War I, Germany's similar tactics, sinking merchant ships without warning, had been condemned as illegal under international law. In World War II, all sides eventually adopted similar practices. The difference lay not in legality, but in necessity. No formal tribunal ever indicted Dönitz for the U-boat campaign itself. At Nuremberg, he was convicted for other violations. But even his Allied naval counterparts testified that his submarine warfare followed the norms of total war as they had evolved. Yet the moral question endured. How far could technology and efficiency justify destruction? When does survival become justification for anything? For many veterans, both Allied and German, the answer never came. They carried the weight of that ambiguity into peace, haunted by what necessity had required them to do. In the war's aftermath, America emerged not just as victor, but as industrial superpower. Its shipyards turned to civilian production. Liberty ships became cargo freighters, hospital ships, even immigrant transports. The same factories that built them would later forge the jet age and the Cold War arsenal. The Atlantic, once a graveyard, became a trade route again, but its lessons were indelible. Power no longer belonged only to the nations with the largest armies. It belonged to those who could build, replace, and sustain them faster than they could be destroyed. That was the ultimate consequence of the Liberty ship. It transformed industry from a tool of war into the engine of world order. From the wreckage of the U-boat pens and the silence of the shipyards, a new understanding of power emerged, one that would define the modern era. The Battle of the Atlantic did more than secure sea lanes. It rewrote the blueprint of war. For centuries, nations had measured power in fleets and divisions. After 1943, the measure changed. It became production rate per month. The Liberty ship, crude and functional, became a symbol of that shift. Each one was identical, every bolt, plate, and engine standardized. This uniformity allowed replacement parts to move as easily as cargo, and for shipyards thousands of miles apart to produce interchangeable vessels. The idea spread far beyond shipbuilding. The methods developed in Kaiser's yards, modular assembly, flow manufacturing, and logistical integration laid the groundwork for post-war American industry. Automobiles, aircraft, and later computers would follow the same rhythm: precision through mass. What began as a desperate race against U-boats ended as the birth of the modern industrial age. At home, the Liberty program changed the face of America itself. More than 700,000 workers, men and women, white and black, skilled and unskilled, joined the shipyards. It was the largest civilian mobilization in history. In Richmond, California, child care centers opened beside the docks so mothers could weld by night and raise children by day. Wages lifted families out of poverty. The war economy became a social revolution. Roosevelt had called it the arsenal of democracy. In truth, it was the first time democracy itself had been built on an assembly line. For historians and strategists, the lesson of the Liberty Fleet is stark. Victory belongs not only to the brave, but to the prepared. Courage wins battles. Logistics wins wars. Technology dazzles, but production sustains. The Germans built better submarines. The Americans built more ships. In the arithmetic of total war, numbers are strategy, and time is the deadliest weapon. As Admiral Ernest King wrote after the war, "No weapon mattered more than the merchant ship that arrived." Today, few Liberty ships remain afloat. Their hulls rest in harbors, rusting testaments to speed and sacrifice. But their spirit endures. In every cargo vessel that crosses the oceans, in every logistics chain that defines global power, they taught the world that war was no longer about conquest, but capacity. That precision outlasts brute force, and that the greatest victory is not merely to fight, but to build faster than destruction itself. Next comes the final reflection, a closing truth check on the myths, distortions, and forgotten realities of this colossal industrial war. Myth 1. The Liberty ships were poorly made. They were simple, not poor. Critics once mocked them as ugly ducklings, but their design was deliberate, fast to build, easy to repair, and cheap to replace. Some did crack under stress, early welding flaws, brittle steel in icy waters, but engineers adapted quickly. Of the 2,710 built, the vast majority served safely, and hundreds continued in service for decades after the war. Their strength lay not in perfection, but in persistence. Fact: a Liberty ship cost 1/10 of a pre-war freighter and could be built in less than a month. No fleet in history matched their impact. Myth 2. The U-boats dominated until the end. For a time, yes, but dominance died in 1943. The German Navy's wolf packs terrorized the Atlantic for 3 years, but once Allied technology and intelligence matured, radar, sonar, code-breaking, the balance shifted completely. From mid-1943 onward, U-boats were destroyed faster than they could be launched. By war's end, most never left port. Fact: between 1943 and 1945, over 75% of active U-boats were sunk. The hunters became victims of their own overextension. Myth 3. America's shipbuilding miracle was luck. It was not luck. It was design, discipline, and organization. Henry J. Kaiser's yards pioneered techniques decades ahead of their time. Prefabricated modules, round-the-clock labor shifts, and interchangeable parts. The record-breaking SS Robert E. Peary was no stunt. It was proof that speed and precision could coexist. Fact: the United States produced more merchant shipping in 4 years than all Axis powers combined across the entire war. Industrial victory was not an accident. It was engineered. History often remembers the drama of battle, not the hum of the factory floor. But the Battle of the Atlantic reminds us that endurance is its own form of courage. The U-boat captains who vanished beneath the waves and the welders who built ships in the night fought the same war, one of faith in their nation's strength. The truth is not triumphalist. It is human. War is not won by miracles, but by millions of ordinary hands doing extraordinary work. That is what Germany's commanders finally understood. Too late. They had waged war against an ocean, but the real tide was America's capacity to build. Steel, sweat, and time. That was the arsenal that changed the world.